Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's episode of Trending, brought to you in association with Iconic Coffee. Head over to shop.iconic.com and use the code TRENDING for 10% off. That was seamless, Jamie.
Well done, mate. They don't know it was the sixth time you tried to do it.
No, they don't.
Well, the Pope's dead, mate. It's Tuesday morning.
It's one way of breaking it to me.
The Pope died on Easter Monday, which I'm sure there's absolutely no symbolic significance to that whatsoever.
No, of course not.
Given he's been walking around very much a dead man walking.
Well, he hasn't been walking,
weeks.
is he?
Well, no, he's been looking very frail for weeks and weeks, and there's been lots of talks and suggestions that he's been dead for a while anyway, and they just waited till a significant day to announce it, which is quite possible.
Wouldn't surprise me. Last time I saw him, he was like one of the Thunderbirds. He was sat in his wheelchair on the balcony, I think, and his arms were moving in such a way that there was definitely someone on the roof above with some fish wire. Sort of, do you know what I mean? Like the puppets that you used to have in like Captain Scarlet and that. Yeah. So I thought he was dead then. I thought they just wheeled him out and, put a bit of blusher on his cheeks and just used like the arms. But
quite possible. Jerry Anderson special.
Yeah.
Used to love those shows as a kid. But I think, the interesting thing to talk about here is that popes, as you've said previously, popes are never young. However, there all of a sudden is quite a changing of the guard when it comes to figureheads of if you like, elite or cult organizations. We've seen this. We've seen in the weeks passing talks of Klaus Schwab, the head of WEF, stepping down. It's close to him stepping down now. He did announce that last year. It's not breaking news like some people are claiming it is. But it does feel like potentially a changing of the guard. Is this a way of bringing in potentially a younger demographic, if you like, to this? Whether who's going to replace the Pope, I don't know. I don't really know how that works in terms of how they get appointed. Who replaces Schwab as head of the WEF? Will they bring in a slightly younger person? Tony Blair's been mentioned. Don't think he's the man you want if you want public opinion on your side. But Jacinda Ardern is another one that's been muted. She would tick that box of being younger and a woman as well. But again, not particularly popular. So do you think there's anything in this, or is this just, he's an old man who's died, basically? Or is it as straightforward as that, or is it more?
I don't know. I mean, they don't go with young popes, do they? God tends to talk to blokes his own age, which I can relate to. That makes sense. So I don't imagine that the next pope will be any younger than like 75 or something.
No.
In terms of the head of the WEF, it's a difficult one because you would think that, yes, you want someone slightly more popular. Klaus Schwab was not popular. He looks and acted like a Bond villain. But then at the same time, do the WEF really give a monkeys about public opinion? They do what they want anyway.
Probably not, no.
So who knows?
Who knows? But one thing that's interesting is just, we touched on it as it's Easter weekend, hence why we didn't have a show Friday or Monday. Christianity and the Western religion of that and Catholicism seem to have made a huge comeback where even people in the alternative media, I'd say actually a large demographic of the alternative media, are starting to push the Christian narrative. Now, that's always been the case to an extent in the southern states of America, the Christian right, but that's happening more and more in Britain.
Yeah.
And what I find really strange is the influence of the church is the smallest it's been in this country, I would say, certainly on the surface. If you look back through history, you go to tiny little villages in places like Norfolk and there's 5 houses and a massive church, village after village after village. The influence of the church and the status of the church within the community was much bigger than it is today. So if Christianity is the answer, then my question is, well, why weren't we living in a golden age when it had its heyday of influence? We weren't. So please explain that to me. But I think the reason that this has made such a comeback, and one of the reasons I think it's so dangerous that it's made such a large comeback, it shuts down the nature of reality conversation. It shuts down the spirituality conversation immediately. And it just keeps people focusing on the symptoms of the right-left paradigm, political corruption, political manipulations, which is important. But if you just finish there and you don't take that next step as to, well, what else are we not being told about who we are, what we are, reality, where we are, what happens next, all those questions that essentially religion of all shapes and sizes just shuts down. Here's the book, that tells you everything you need to know. I feel we're always going to reach a point where we're kind of on the outside looking in. We're never going to reach a point that we can get ahead.
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons why. Religion was destroyed very much for the last few decades, really. I remember as a kid, no one really went to church. A few people might, but not really. I remember the saying of, this is the church, this is the steeple, look inside, look, there's no people. No one was that bothered about it.
No.
people that were alternative thinkers, what you would call now, I guess, the alternative media, were massively anti-religion, actually, and that's kind of flipped. But I think destroying religion was perfect because it destroyed cultural norms of the West, which, whether you're into religion or not, I'm not, but the West was built on Christianity. And if you want to destroy cultural norms, you destroy Christianity. Yep. Also, in terms of the family unit, going to church on a Sunday, sitting around the table, eating together, saying a prayer and all that sort of stuff, get rid of all that. But now they've made a comeback because I think part of it is probably what you're saying as well, to shut down the nature of reality conversation. Another part of it is you almost want support or apathy towards this end of times messianic lunacy. Because if you've got a lot of religious people, you can get them to accept prophecy.
Yeah, that's a
well, that's
fact.
what it said in the book. Never mind the fact that it's a load of human beings doing it. What I don't understand about it, though, in terms of the support for the church from those that are supposedly alternative thinkers, is in the last few years, the church has become hella woke.
Yeah, it has.
Like hella woke. So they're pushing all the transgender stuff, which you oppose. They were pushing the COVID narrative.
Yeah, didn't the Pope say
style.
that Jesus would have got the vaccine?
That was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that
it.
Jesus would have got the jab. Of course he would. So it's kind of like, I don't understand. And also the Pope pushes all the climate change and all that sort of stuff. Like they push all the cult narratives, yet lots of people that are against the cult narratives have now come on board with the church. So I'm not sure. I don't get that. But
no, I mean, this Pope that's just left us with, he was the most politically kind of aggressive Pope that, well, certainly that I can remember in my lifetime, speaking on political issues, getting involved, having meetings with world leaders and audiences with people of influence. I don't remember that with any of the previous ones. So you're right, absolutely right. It's a really interesting one because you see these people talk about, the church is the answer, but the church itself is a bit corrupt. So I might not like the Pope, but I might not like the Archbishop, but the religion itself I support. Well, surely if the religion it's the religion of God, then he could sort his own house, couldn't he?
I don't know. God's got some weird choices for what he's
very
into,
weird choices
to be fair, across the board.
Very weird.
Right, moving on then. Here we go. We like a bit of hypocrisy, especially in politics. Climate advisor racks up 40,000 air miles while backing tax on frequent flyers.
Seems fair.
Yeah, fair enough. A government climate advisor who backed a tax on frequent flyers racked up 40,000 air miles in a year by jetting to environmental conferences. It's almost like it's all nonsense, isn't it? Nigel Topping is one of 6 members of Ed Miliband's Climate Change Committee, which in February recommended that ministers consider a new frequent flyer levy to cut emissions. I'm assuming he won't be paying that levy. Me and you'll be paying that probably for him. The committee also suggested ministers should increase airfares for holidaymakers. Don't be going off on holiday and enjoying yourself, for crying out loud, by raising flight taxes and ban airline reward schemes. Yeah, don't be rewarded. Don't reward the people for anything. Its members who report to the government have called for policies to manage demand among air passengers to cut carbon emissions. But Telegraph analysis shows Mr. Topping himself accrued 11 times more air miles in the last year than the average Briton, with travel to summits in high-end hotels. Ooh, it's the good life for Mr. Topping. Rules for thee, not for me. Of course, they don't actually believe the nonsense that they're peddling. None of them do. No. I've said it multiple times. That's why you've got people like Obama, Gates, Bezos, Gore, DiCaprio, a lot of these people, not just flying around in private jets constantly, but they're buying multi-million-pound beachfront properties, which is not what you do when you think that the sea levels are rising, because they don't believe it. To move on slightly away from this story, but it's still connected to it. So at the minute, they're talking about the GB Energy Bill. Now, the GB Energy Bill and GB Energy, I mean, it's Great British Energy, right? So that's the people.
State-owned.
That's state-owned, surely. Only it's not. It's a private company with one director. And who's that director? Ed Miliband, the 10-watt light bulb that can't eat a bacon sandwich. He's the sole director of GB Energy. What's interesting about this, because it's a private company, essentially, if this bill passes, which it probably will, he will have access to £8 billion of taxpayer money with no government oversight, no scrutiny in the House of Parliament. He can go and spend it on what he wants. Do you know what I mean? He can go and buy a pack of what are those things called with bright coloured hair and they used to have their bums hanging out? Trolls.
Trolls, yeah.
He can go and buy a load of toy trolls if he wants, and you can't say anything about it because, do you know what I mean? It's a private company and he's the sole director. Another thing as well, which came out this week, I'm a bit of a fly in a greenhouse here, but it's all related to the same thing. When Labour came into to try and get into power, they told us that our energy bills would go down. The average of £600 a year your bills will go down by. Of course, they've gone up ever since they've come in power because they're liars. And just this week, they've admitted now, oh no, under Labour, energy bills will in fact go up, despite the fact we said they would go down, so you would vote for us and put us into power, which again, getting bored of saying it for the 1 billionth time, in fear of exaggerating, that's why there's no point in voting in the current system, because they can tell you whatever they want to get your vote, and as soon as they've got your vote and they're in power, they don't have to do any of it. So therefore, what's the point?
There is no point. It's like you said, until there's a contract between the people and the politicians or people vying to be politicians, there's no accountability, and then this cycle will just continue and continue and continue. And the ridiculous thing is, come the next election, Gaz, people will lap it up again. The Tories will say, we'll do this, we'll undo that, we'll undo this. Farage will spout his usual crap. Starmer will go and say everything that they've done previously was a success, X, Y, and Z, and people will lap it up again. Oh, I'm voting for them because they said they'd sort me.
They've got a great manifesto.
But but
they don't have to do anything on it. So what's the point?
The interesting one with the Miliband story there is that, to me, how that isn't a huge conflict of interest and how that's legal, I have absolutely no idea.
Well, if it's not, they'll just change the law.
Because if you're taking taxpayers' money and essentially giving it to yourself with no accountability of what you're going to do with it, that's theft. That's stealing taxpayers' money.
Yeah, but it's okay when they do it.
Well, exactly. And the energy bills, that's fraud for me. If you're saying that this is going to happen and then you're doing the opposite, and I guarantee there'll be, papers and internal memos and WhatsApp signals, whatever, between those MPs knowing that they're going to be going up before it even came out. Before they even got power. So it's not like they've walked in and gone, oh, actually the situation's worse than we thought, which is what they've claimed a lot, even though they had complete transparency of all the books. So the whole 22 billion black hole, we've only put these taxes up because we didn't know the full information. Well, you did. You're lying again. Yeah. That's fraud. That's basic lack of human decency. Literally trolling. It's a good example.
At the same time, though, if you believe a politician on the campaign trail...
Well, true.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've got an inflatable dartboard for sale on eBay if you want to buy it.
Well, there is one politician who's brilliant, and I wish we lived the other side of the pond, mate,
so
because they're winning over there. They're really, really winning over there. The orange toddler is winning for everybody. Anyway, the innocent tourists locked up under Donald Trump's US border crackdown. Well, that's what he campaigned on, didn't he? That's what everyone wants. Innocent tourists, yep. How holidays have turned into nightmares as a number of rich European visitors plummet. Well, that's also slightly misleading. I will add that headline. It says number of rich European visitors. Well, this is actually just European visitors. It's not rich European visitors. It's European visitors in general. Don't know why it's felt the need to add that in, because the story's not about that. It's about 3 or 4 young couples. Anyway.
Daily Mail, they can...
For many, visiting America is the opportunity of a lifetime. Jesus, how low's your bar? The chance to explore the bright lights of New York, the vast wilderness of the Midwest, and the wild theme parks of Florida take millions of tourists to the US every single year. But for some, the dream has turned into a nightmare. Instead of relaxing on the beach, they're spending days and sometimes weeks locked up in jail. Now, we spoke about the guy from El Salvador last week and how that seems to have just, gone on and on and on. But you're not talking about potentially someone who they think's a criminal. You're talking about people who, through this story I'll go into, someone who arrived in Hawaii and hadn't booked a hotel yet, spent 2 weeks in jail. I know, exactly.
That saves him buying a hotel, I suppose.
A couple who arrived in Los Angeles who didn't have the correct type of visa. 9 days in jail. That surely takes minutes to resolve. Ridiculous. Anyway, these people have been handcuffed, strip searched, and left in concrete cells because of this newly empowered law that Donald Trump signed through with an executive order, which essentially makes the bit between... So it's always been a bit of a grey area. So when you get off your plane in whatever country, until you go through passport control in the country you're in, and you had it stamped, that's sort of a neutral zone in the middle, where under I think it's the Geneva Convention, United Nations law, you're kind of protected in that period, in that thing, but you're not technically in the country you've landed in yet. Even in England. So if you get a flight back to England from Spain, let's say, until you've gone through passport control in England, even if you're on the floor at Heathrow, you're technically not in England. It's so bizarre. But anyway, what this new law has done is made those military zones, those middle ones, martial military zones, which means anything goes. Absolutely anything goes. Hence why people can be held, handcuffed, strip searched, put in concrete cells, all their baggage checked, and interrogated with no justification, no right to lawyers, no right to phone calls, no right to even speak to family to warn them what's going on. So this is the main example of this particular story. Two young German tourists found themselves detained and deported for not having any accommodation booked when they arrived in Hawaii. Now, that's not normally a stipulation of entering America. You normally just have to prove that you have a flight out within the 90-day period. In March, a British backpacker found herself locked up for nearly 3 weeks after having the wrong type of visa when she tried to enter the US from Canada. The British government is now warning travellers not to go to America, or the fact that they could face being arrested or detained if they fail to abide by the rules. Now, there isn't really any. You have an ESTA visa and you turn up. Yeah. But what's interesting here is the US tourist industry, in terms of travellers from Europe, is down 14% this year. So I don't get how, as a we're winning just Trump fan, you can justify that as a good thing. I don't get that. If you're saying, okay, he's deporting gangs and he's smashing criminal networks, again, there's not really any evidence he's doing that. But you could at least stand and try and justify that because, yeah, that sounds like a good thing. But he's destroying the tourism industry. How do you think the hotels and the bars and the places in your Floridas and your New Yorks and your California coasts, how are they dealing with that?
Well, just keep telling people they're winning and they'll believe you because they don't want to know otherwise. I mean, America's not the same place it was anyway. Like when we went recently, and I applied. I think you already had an ETSA, but I didn't, so I had to apply for one. And I was asked for all my social media details. That's the first time that's ever happened. So the land of the free needs to know what you're saying before they let you in.
Well, there has been people that have been refused entry because they had their social media and there was evidence they'd slagged off Trump. We talked about that on Friday night.
Yeah, live. It's insane, isn't it? Yeah, I mean they let me in, but there you go. But it's again, it comes back to the same thing. If this was happening under Biden and Harris, people would be kicking off about it. People that actually have a bit of a brain tend to be sort of anti-establishment in a way, or at least claim to be, would have been calling it out of the fact that, like, come on, mate, this is madness. This is tourists coming to our country to visit, to spend their money, and we're detaining them for 3 weeks because you didn't have a hotel booked or whatever. This is bizarre. This shouldn't be happening. But they're not saying that at all because their team won. And it's a very clever way of doing it. And I think that's exactly what Trump winning was all about. It was a way of, because people say this all the time when you call out Trump. Say, oh, so Harris would have been better, would she? No. They both work for the same people, and it ain't you, and it ain't me. So the same thing would have happened. The difference is you would have called it out if it was Harris or Biden or whoever else on the Democratic side. You're allowing it to happen because it's Donald Trump, and you don't want to admit, although more and more people are starting to see it, to be fair, which is encouraging.
Yeah, and this is just the actions of a tyrant. That's what he is. He's just a tyrant, essentially.
He's just
chucking weight around.
He's just like a little schoolyard bully. That's what he is.
Literally chucking his weight around. Look at me. Look how big and tough I am.
Yeah,
I'll be tougher than anyone's ever been.
Be the toughest president in the world, man. Right, China. China hosts world's first half marathon race between humans and robots.
Normal.
Right, checks it's April 1st. No, it's not. That's annoying. Robots have raced against humans in a half marathon for the first time. Some 21 humanoid robots raced alongside thousands of runners around the 21-kilometer course in Beijing, China, on Saturday. Some of the robots that took part were as short as 3 foot 9 inches. It's quite short. While others were as tall as 5 foot 9 inches. They had to resemble humans and be able to walk or run. I suppose that helps when you're running a half marathon. Wheels were not allowed. Yeah, I guess that'd be cheating.
Identify as a wheel.
The winning robot was Tiangong Ultra, which crossed the finishing line with a time of 2 hours and 40 minutes. I don't want to slag the robot off, but that's quite slow, isn't it,
It's quite
Jamie?
slow, yeah.
While the men's winner of the race had a time of 1 hour, 2 minutes. I looked at that and it was like, here we go. It's just a sign of things to come, obviously, but it's about normalizing it.
Yep.
It's just that stepping stone of here we go. And then you get to a point where suddenly robots they are everywhere anyway, but suddenly they're taking your jobs. Suddenly they're in the military. Suddenly they've got rights. I was actually reading that the other day and I forgot about it, that there is a campaign to give human rights to robots and all this kind of stuff, and to electronic devices in general. Which will almost certainly, the world is just mental enough for that to happen. Yeah. It's one of those I looked at and I thought, here we go.
It'll put the sex doll industry out of business, wouldn't it? That
potentially, yeah. It's not a massive concern.
No, it's not a massive concern, but I just, it's a funny one. But no, you're absolutely right. It's increasing the normalization where people are used to interacting with robots and artificial technology on their daily basis. Now, the thought now, to say to us, but say to anybody a few years ago, you'll be stood on the start line at your local 10K and there'll just be a robot stood next to you, a bit shorter. That's going to do the race with you. It would have been like, that's a sci-fi film, mate. You're having a laugh.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's reality. And if it's reality in China, it's going to be reality in the West very, very soon, because this whole illusion that China is separated from the West when it comes to all the things that matter, it's absolutely not. It's the blueprint for the West.
It seems to be the testing ground because it was such a closed society. It's almost like we can just test all this stuff, get all this stuff going on, which makes you wonder what's going on in North Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's such a closed society. You think, well, what is going on there? But loads of people will be excited by this, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's amazing.
That's so cool. Yeah, it's
like
absolutely
wars,
bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre, but not very quick at the moment. I think me and you could have beaten them.
Yeah, but these are only the ones there, mate, aren't they? To be fair.
Well, yeah,
there'll be other ones.
I think that's the point to make as well. Is if that's what's on public display, what the hell have the military got in the underground bases, in the secret projects behind the scenes that they've not rolled out yet? Because this whole, again, use the same word, this whole illusion that the pinnacle of technology is what you see in the public eye is complete BS, absolute BS. Behind the scenes, the technology that exists, this technology to do that would have existed probably 25 years ago.
Yeah, I imagine.
Behind the scenes.
This is, from what I can
be very surface level.
From the article, is nothing to do with the state. It literally is. I mean, I joke saying robot wars, but it is. I think these were built by, regular Joes, for want of a better phrase, rather than, the military or whatever.
But they need things like this to come out so that then when they come out with their own, or they release their own technology, there's not a huge jump from what existed to what they have. They need that middle ground of, look, this is what, like you say, a few average Joes have been able to come up with. With all the investment and all the contracts, this is what the military have come up with. They need that middle ground. Because if you go from that to that, it's, whoa, hang on a minute. How have you got there?
Well, that's it. I mean, you look at, Boston Dynamics and stuff like that over the last few years, and it's like, it is quite alarming, actually. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's like set in my ways 1950s, I hate progress, it were better in my day, and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, do you know what I mean? I don't want to have an argument with a robot in the middle of the night that has absolutely no empathy, which is the point.
I'm not going to touch that one. Right, final story. Final story of the day. Drugged into oblivion. More than 60% of US adults admit they are taking pharmaceutical drugs. Now, that won't come as a shock to anyone, certainly in America. That certainly won't come as a shock. But America is the most drugged and dependent society in the world, I would suggest, on pharmaceuticals. And having been to America multiple times, you've only got to watch 2 or 3 ad breaks on television to see the number of pharmaceutical adverts that get played. Constantly. Where the regulations are nowhere near as strict as they are here in the UK. So the way that these products are sold is in such a way that it convinces you've got something. Are you tired when you get home from work? You feel you need to unwind? Well, yeah, that probably describes most people. Doesn't mean you need to take a pharmaceutical. It means you need to sit on the sofa and relax, have a nice dinner. Doesn't mean you need to take pharmaceuticals. And then come the end of the advert, I'm sure you can relate as well, is side effects may include breathe. It's like, okay, you've just read all the things that could happen and probably will happen because you've done the studies to show that they have happened in the past. But I haven't heard that. I've heard the first bit. Yeah. And as a result, people then get onto things like Prozac and various other things.
I mean, I like that they do that there, though, Jay. To be fair,
the side effects?
Yeah, because even though they obviously like they this is going to be great for you. This will really help you sleep, and then they take a deep breath and they go may cause, and and then they literally scattergun all the things like your hair to fall out, your dog to die, and all these various things that could happen. But I like that they actually do that, because in the UK they don't.
No,
they don't actually tell you.
No, this is true. A drug antidepressant that says a side effect may include suicidal thoughts is still the pinnacle for me of side effects. Bizarre. But basically, the reason this study is interesting is because it's talked about the cumulative effect and essentially the domino effect of taking one pharmaceutical. Because for me, I take 2 supplements a day. I take magnesium and I take ashwagandha. The sort of barometer for me of what I'm going to take is really high. Whereas the point of this story is once you start taking one, it lowers it. So then all of a sudden, 2, 3, 4. Hence why now a quarter of America are on 4 or more on a day.
What's
4 or
ashwagandha?
more. I'm not even, it's like I'm not going to butcher it. It's energy, helps with energy and brain function.
Oh, right.
That's why I'm happy in the mornings and I have to pick you
I'm
up
on
every
my
day.
3rd coffee just to get through it. Yeah, well, I need some ashwagandha then, whatever it's called.
But basically, 4 or more pharmaceuticals a day, and that's talking about the entire population.
Well, what they do is they give you one which comes with a side effect, which they give you another one to cure the side effect. It's like the swallow the spider to eat the fly. It just carries on going. It is mental. I mean, I must admit, I noticed because I watch a little bit of American TV because I watch ice hockey. And so normally when you watch like football in England, they target the audience. So it's like, right, who watches football? Right, well, mainly men. Right, cars, booze, gambling.
And a lot of erectile dysfunction adverts, to be fair, as well these days.
Bit of that, yeah. Right, give them that. Whereas in America, yeah, you get your cars, yeah, you get your gambling. But it's just pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
It is honestly it's mad. Northwell Health. And all this
Well,
kind of
if
stuff.
they didn't spend money, then the American television industry there wouldn't be one. Essentially, the amount of money they spend is extraordinary, which is dangerous for various reasons. One being they're convincing people to take drugs they don't need, probably. Right, something that exercise and a decent diet could probably resolve. The other thing is when things like 2020 happen, the money and influence these organizations have over the media and therefore the media coverage is unimaginable because. If you say, let's say hypothetically, your CNN and the program you have costs £1 million a week, hypothetically. Well, if $500,000 of that is coming from the drug companies, well, you can't afford to lose that, can you? No. So all of a sudden, your coverage is going to be very, very skewed because you're terrified of losing that. You ain't going to call out Pfizer, are you? Because Pfizer will pull the plug.
It's more than 50%.
Oh yeah, much more
comes
than
from
50%.
pharmaceutical. Because I remember I think it was during the US Open, wasn't it? As in the tennis. And I think Djokovic, who'd refused the jab, he won, and the award was sponsored by Pfizer. And it's like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the amount of influence they have is astonishing. But the reason this story is important because it just shows and again highlights what we've spoken about many times on this program, that they want to create dependency in all different forms. Dependency financially, dependency in terms of ability to survive, energy, food supply, all of that. And the other one is dependency on pharmaceutical drugs, because if you're dependent on them, and that's what happens when you take drugs for a long period of time, your body obviously builds up a dependency on them. You can't just go cold turkey. People do that. They end up in severe problems, even worse than the drugs at some point. And you then create a situation where you are beholden to the state. You also create a situation where you have all those side effects we listed and all those other long-term effects of taking medication of a certain type continuously. Yeah. Damage to your organs, damage to your nervous system, your respiratory system, your heart, all of which again creates a further dependency down the line on the state, on the healthcare systems. And you add that to the food, which in America is some of the worst anywhere in the world in terms of how processed it is, what it's sprayed with, what's awful. Injected into it. I mean, I only have to spend 2 or 3 days in America and I feel absolutely dreadful because the food's just awful. They're creating essentially the unhealthiest society in the world in what people look at as the home of the free world, the land of the free, the greatest nation on earth, the best economy in the world. That's how you're kind of sold America. When in truth, it's a very overweight. This story shows a fifth of the country are depressed. Obviously, a quarter of the country are on more than 4 pharmaceutical medications on a daily basis. Whether it's autism, whether it's diabetes, whether it's heart disease, they're top of the metrics. Whether it's fertility, they're in the lowest.
It's in trillions and trillions of debt.
It is. It's an absolute mess.
It's
and it's not an accident.
It's not.
Obviously not an accident.
No, of course it's not. It's great to have so many viewers in America, actually. we're not slagging off your country in that sense, so don't worry about that. It's the same with the UK. We're all in it together. People seem to have this thing when we talk about Trump, like, focus on your own country. It's like, no, I'm aware my country's on its arse, mate. We're all in it together, actually. You're just kind of, you've still got a little bit of hopium at the minute, which is probably one of the best pharmaceuticals going at the minute. If I wanted to control a population, one way is to tell them they're winning, which certainly is winning the game at the minute in terms of shutting people up because they think they're winning. They're not going to rebel. And another thing is to have a depressed, fat, addicted, dumbed down, drugged population. It's far easier to control than a mentally alert, switched on, healthy, motivated population that actually wants change and wants to make a difference.
Yeah, well, there's a secret society based in London called the Fabian Society, which was where Aldous Huxley and George Orwell were kind of semi-involved in some description, which is one of the theories of how they were able to write their books and be so accurate about predicting the future. But one of the original leaders of that, their kind of modus operandi was to defeat an enemy slowly, weaken them and weaken them and weaken them over time, rather than go in and have a big decisive battle where it was going to be one way or the other and you've got a situation where there's a vulnerability that you could lose. Instead, you just defeat slowly to the point that your enemy is so beaten down that you just walk in and take over. And you can look at that and apply that to not just America, but the rest of the world through things like fluoride in your water slowly. It's a slow cumulative effect. You use fluoride toothpaste once in the morning, it's not going to affect you. You use it water, in your water for months, for years and decades. That's going to start to have an effect. Same with the fast food. You go and have McDonald's, nothing's probably going to happen. You have McDonald's every week for 10 years. You have other food that was just dreadful. You have all this GM stuff constantly. Pharmaceutical drugs, you take one pharmaceutical drug, it's probably not going to be a massive issue. Do it for years and years, it just beats you down. And I think it's that tactic that's being used, as you say. They don't want an alert, vibrant, virile population. They're a lot harder to control.
Virile people are a lot harder to control. And also you've got Bezmenov, the ex-KGB guy, saying in 1984 about the fact of demoralization, demoralizing the West. Look at what we've done to you for the last 20 minutes. But yeah, that it is obvious what's happening. This is all these things, which is funny because you talk about all these stories and they all seem completely different. Like how you can go from robots in China to pharmaceutical drug addiction in America. True. But everything is connected. It's about destroying humanity and humans and all that sort of stuff. Everything ties into each other, but
it does. And I think the reason we highlight a lot in America is because it's a global agenda. So,
and what happens there comes here.
Yeah, and every nation has different aspects. They might be further ahead. So China might be slightly further ahead on the technological side. America might be further ahead on the pharmaceutical dependence side and the food side. This country might be further ahead on the energy prices and cost of living. They all intertwine.
And the squashing of free speech. We're leading the way at the minute.
100%.
But it's only just for now.
It is. And it's very important to highlight this because this one, for example, this one which is finishing on here, that's a choice. It's a choice to take pharmaceutical drugs. It's a choice to eat the food that they're giving you. That's a decision to make. So by not making that decision, this story becomes obsolete because you can take the power and have the authority to not do any of that. Same when it comes to, the normalization of interaction with AI and robots. You can choose to not have, Google Home hubs and Alexas in your house. You can choose to not say, hey, Google, call this person. You can choose to not do that. So again, sounds like we're being negative, but it's all still within our grasp. It's all still within our power.
Everything needs our consent. That's the point. That's why there's so much psychological gaslighting and stuff going on, because they need you to agree to it.
Yeah.
It was, that was the whole thing we spoke about so many times during the COVID, the fact that they had all these behavioral scientists and all that sort of stuff and psychologists. If they could have knocked down your door and dealt with you physically, they would have done, but there's not enough of them, which is why they need to manipulate you and your perceptions to get you to go along with it. As soon as you stop going along with it, crumbles like a wet cake, Jamie.
It does, and that's why they spend all this money to try and influence, to try and keep us dumbed down and keep us in ignorance, keep us fighting each other, because ultimately they are absolutely terrified of an awakening of humanity because they're just basically playground bullies. And bullies are always cowards and weak, feeble, and inside just pathetic small people terrified of losing their power. And it's time they did, is it not?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, it was brought to you in association with... Do you want to do the closing, Jay? Because I see if you can live up to my opening, which was seamless.
It was brought to you in association with Iconic Coffee. Head over to shop.iconic.com and use the code TRENDING for 10% off. On a final note, the live event we did on Friday at Sutton Coldfield will be available on the channel tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. UK time. So hopefully you'll enjoy watching that. And Gareth and Richard will be back tomorrow.
Yes.